Hi, folks. For those who are going to be watching, there's no one watching at this second, but there will be later on in the evening. For those who are watching or going to be watching, it's good to see you. We've got John mcdropout on, and it's good to have you, John.
Yeah.
And John was just sharing about Christmas. How you doing, bro?
Oh, I'm doing great, Jay. I'm glad to see you're doing well also.
Thank you, mate. Thank you. And
Excellent, man. Yeah, so I mean, we've been talking a little bit about what we did on over Christmas, and I think we both had a really great Christmas, and I think it was probably a good little break there for us. I think.
yeah, it was the best Christmas I've ever had.
Oh, that's good, man. That's good. Well, hopefully just yet, hopefully there's more to come.
Yeah, yeah, it was the best Christmas. Yeah. Um, anything you want to talk about, or anything you want to reflect on over the year, or anything that you've read, any thoughts, or just whatever, just feel free to talk about anything you want to talk about, John.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I didn't really have any topics that I had in mind or anything. I mean, I know that it's that a lot of times when we're discussing these things with each other, it does seem like we're kind of getting really heated, and I know that there's a lot of division. But I mean, I think in the long run, people need to realize that these YouTube interactions are very, they seem probably more up close and personal than they might actually be, right? I think we need to, and we definitely need to be a little more aware of how our actions are being perceived by others online, and I think that that I think I see improvements in the community that way. I think a lot of us are becoming a little more aware of that it's not as flippant as these YouTube things used to be, where we weren't really interacting with each other directly. I think in these hangouts, it's become a lot more personal, and people need to just be a little more cognizant of that.
Yeah,
But I don't know. Maybe that's I'm just trying to bring together kind of what I've learned over the year. I think that's one of the things. I think that we need to be a lot more sympathetic to people on the other end of the line and realize that they're probably in very similar situations to us.
yeah, 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 yeah. I think you're right, John. I think those are wise words, mate. I think, especially at the moment, I'm not going to say details or anything about people or whatever, but I think everybody needs to learn what you're saying, everybody. So yeah, totally agree with you, mate.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, it's really for me. I mean, it's about being sympathetic, but I mean, we need to be cognizant that we're being a positive influence on other people too. And I mean, that's really tough to do when we're trying to be so stand up for what we believe in online and trying to make our point of view known. It can become very hard to separate that from being nice to other people and being compassionate. I don't know.
Mm,
That's kind of what I've been trying to work on, anyways.
mm, mm. I tell you what I like about you, John, is you got such passion, mate. When I hear that you're singing, it just stirs me when I hear you sing, because it just comes. You just sing from the heart, and I really admire that. It's really good stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. It's important to do whatever you're doing probably with the most gusto you can manage, right? I think I
Yeah,
think even if you're not good at it, I think people can sense that passion and that strain in your voice. That you're really working hard to project that emotion outwards. And I think people do respond to that.
well, I love you. I love those songs. I
Well,
really do.
thanks. Thanks. I've been working on it for a while. I've kind of put the guitar down a little bit, but I do need to get back into it, and
I
I'll
wish you
keep I'll
do.
keep working it.
I sincerely mean this. I wish you'd do some more. I wish you would, because I'd be listening to it, mate. I tell you. Not
Cool.
just-
Well, I'm glad. I'm glad I got at least one fan out there.
You have got a fan in me. If you keep singing like that, mate, I watch you all the time, bro. Honestly. Well,
Oh,
one of the
cool.
songs that I listened to, it was like anti-religion and stuff like that. But even though I completely disagreed with it, I just thought this guy's got such passion. So I came on YouTube after listening to you. I thought I'm gonna preach with all my heart. And so I did a sermon a couple of days after I saw that. Just give it all my heart. I thought, if John can show that passion, I'll show him what passion is. And I started preaching, you know. So I really, something I respect about you, and I admire about you. So there.
Well, thanks, Jay. Yeah, I mean, I hope that's the message people get from it. That you don't. I don't consider myself really great at any of those things like playing guitar or singing or even talking to people. But I attempt to show people that you don't have to be perfect or reach some set standard to be passionate about it and to put your all into it. I think
Yeah.
I think regular people can really get other people to respond to them just by putting themselves out there and being it's almost almost all this raw honesty that I see in a performance or putting yourself into these YouTube hangout sort of things.
Mm. Well, I get that, mate. I get that.
Yeah, Jay. I mean, I've always appreciated your preaching. I mean, it is quite you've got quite a style that I think is quite your own. And there's definitely this this passion to it that it warms my heart quite a bit. Maybe even if I don't agree with it, it does get me as a just as a passionate performance. I feel like it's moving in a very human way. I think that's very much grounded in a lot of the things that I value, like being passionate and performing to the utmost of your just to the very limits of your ability. I think that's very that's very admirable.
Thanks, mate. Thanks. I do try, and most of the time, if I'm not tired or whatever, but I do try to put my heart and soul into it when I do preach at my best. I do try to give it everything. Sometimes I might do it too much, but I do try to do that. Yeah, it's my greatest joy. Some people like to, I don't know, they can play music or whatever gift they have, but preaching is the gift that I feel that I have and I enjoy doing. So.
Cool. Well, yeah. Well, anything else we want to talk about? I mean, have you been reading any good books or anything over the holidays?
Have I read anything good books? I'm trying to think. I've been reading a few bits here and there, John. Nothing comes to mind the last few weeks really. I finished this a while back. John Lennox thing, The God's Undertaker and Science Buried God. I enjoyed that. It was good. It talked about. I think the main thought that I got really. There's a guy called Paul Davies. He's a physicist. He's not a believer. And I've not read the book, but at the end of the book, as a physicist, he talks about how he kind of was asking questions about the nature of reality and the meaning of existence, and his conclusion was, because it refers back to this Lennox book, his conclusion was that why is there consciousness in the universe? Why do we have consciousness, and why do we have rationality? And in the Lennox books, all this discussion about whether you agree with it or not about DNA and information, all the rest of it, and it got my mind thinking to a guy called Philo, a Jewish philosopher. And if you look at some of his writing, he talks about the logos and reason, and he kind of superimposes that on the Old Testament. But what came to my mind is you're looking at ancient philosophy, you're looking at this non-believer physicist, and then you're looking at Lennox and the discussions that we had about Kant and stuff like that, and just thinking about rationality. Why do we have rationality? Why is it we can think in the universe. That's the main thinking that I've been pondering, and I want to continue to think about. I don't know what you think.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to that, and I'm not really well versed in the idea of, why would there be something called consciousness? I think when we're discussing consciousness, there's a very, it's an interesting concept because we always discuss it from the point of a consciousness, right? So it almost presupposes itself as an introduction to itself, and there's a lot of questions about whether or not we can even really ask that question, right? Even if just because we're so causally linked to everything that happens before our consciousness arises, right? I think that's what the main point is that when the universe has to come before us in order for us to think of it, and that sort of temporal situation sort of puts us at a bit of a disadvantage for discussing why consciousness exists, and I think that's kind of maybe where I'm sitting now, like that the question might be maybe not unintelligible, but harder to it may be nearly impossible for us to answer from our current framework of consciousness, right? And I think there are other ones that maybe can shed light on it, but I don't think I've moved kind of into that area of hope that there might be an answer to that.
I know, I appreciate what you're saying there. I think for me, John, I by no means fully understand the ramifications of all the, if we had Ozzy on here, and we would, but I don't fully understand the ramifications of some of these topics. But I think for me, what speaks to me is, all the discussions that we're having, all the discussions that atheists and Christians are having, and the history of philosophy and scientific inquiry and all this, it comes down to this issue of rationality and reason, and I use reason in a general sense, and it's there. It is there. What it is in terms of how it relates to consciousness and all the rest of it, it is there. And so if it is there, then I have to think about, well, why, not why, but what is the, why would we have this reason to be able to comprehend the universe, to be able to comprehend our experiences and things like that? So I understand like the philosophical ramifications that you're talking about, but the existential reality of reason being there is something that we can't ignore, and I think that's what I was impressed by Paul Davies, is even as an unbeliever, as he reflects as a physicist, he just can't deny certain things are there, and he has to take consonance of that.
Right. I think a lot of the great. I mean, even Kant, I think, is very much, he argues kind of ontologically from reason, right? Where he says that there is reason and there is rationality, and so he almost he posits like a sort of a rational or a reasonable organ that can be responsible for that sort of thing. And he argues very ontologically for that exact thing, that we experience reason and we experience rationality, and that there isn't really a way for us to deny it in our pursuit of its source.
Yeah.
And so we're sort of forced to argue from its existence instead of arguing to its existence. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So we're very much arguing ontologically for the same thing, sort of this reasonable, rational sense. And I think we need to, in that discussion, there needs to be more focus on maybe where that source of that reason and rationality stems from. But I think, but you're right. I mean, there's ontologically, we can't really deny its existence in our arguments against it.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think that's where I'm at. That's kind of where I'm at, and I want to develop that. think about that more in the new year. I'm just beginning to think about it more. So um, I think that I don't know if you saw the Matt Slick debates recently, the last few weeks, few months.
I think I missed the last two. I'm not sure if I have though. Were
Either,
they just
sorry, mate.
sorry? Were they just open discussions, or did they have any special guests? Or
It was Aaron, I think Aaron Ra and Matt Slick, and then
yes, I think I saw that one.
the Matt Delonte. I think it.
Yes, I saw that one too. Yeah.
And what struck me is that there was these discussions about rationality and the nature of rationality in terms of logic and things like that, and it just they're just like, to me, they sort of weave into what you were saying, but weave into it from a different angle. But the main issue is that this rationality is there, and I find it fascinating, really. I find it fascinating as you look at like Philo, and he talks about the logos, and he talks the issue that I find fascinating is you get this ancient philosopher like Philo, a Jewish philosopher, and he's talking about the logos, about reason, this eternal reason. And then you think of the Enlightenment, and a lot of emphasis, like you've just been talking about Kant, and about the defining reason, and trying to refine it in its application and in its definitions. And then you've got the modernist projects and things like that, and it's just, I just find it fascinating that throughout all that history, that is it is, I think it is the central focus of really a person's worldview, of how you relate to that issue, of how you engage with that issue, about the nature of reason, the nature of rationality. I don't know what you think. It's just what I think.
No, I mean I tend to agree with you there. I'm a big believer in the idea that every piece of information that you take on as knowledge will affect the model that you create of the world, right? And that will definitely have an effect on the decisions that you're going to make, and the predictions that you'll make about those actions or interactions that you have. And so I'm always very much cognizant of the idea that when we're discussing these things about like the basis of reason and logic, that a shift in the basis, or a shift in the reasoning behind what we would call our rational impulse, or the way that we come to these reasonable conclusions, is going to be that's going to have real world consequences for people in their decision making. Maybe not right away, but in certain situations that will make the difference between a right decision and a wrong decision. So I'm very much aware of that I think you're right, that it's actually very central when we're talking about these positions, to the way that we're going to analyze and work with the information we get, especially if we consider reason to be imparted to us from a certain being, right? Or I think it even has a lot to do with the nature of that being that we might propose is imparting that reason, could have an effect on the way that we view our reasonable faculties, as Kant would say.
I think what I find fascinating, I'd like to think about it more, I'd like to read up on it more. I'm kind of fascinated with, but I've not done a lot of reading on it, but I'm fascinated with history and reason, and how they relate to each other. I'm very fascinated by that, and it's something that I want to think about more, because I think that when you look at like past philosophy, and I don't pretend to have read anything of substantial weight with Hegel or anything like that, But when you think about people like Hegel, yeah, sorry about that. Hegel, when you think about Spinoza, when you think about Karl Marx, they always seem to have a narrative about history and how it relates to reason. And I think this is a very key issue in which I don't think we really have explored as much in these times, in these post-modern times. And that, because I think that when we talk about rationality and reason, it's not, when you think of like Spinoza, he saw that history was moving like in a pantheistic sense. Hegel saw history as a, if I remember, it's antithesis, thesis, and synthesis. Marx saw it from an economic point of view. But as they saw history moving, these three thinkers, reason had a role to play within their matrix. And so what I'm saying is that if we look at, if we're going to have a coherent understanding of reason, we have to relate it to history. So for another example is, if you look at the Enlightenment, if you look at Kant, like you were saying, and the Enlightenment, they, in that historical flow, they developed certain ideas about what they thought reason was. Then you have Charles Darwin, and talked about evolution, and reason then has a different understanding in that context. So what I'm trying to say is that the historical flow, how we view history and how it relates to reason, is an area that I think is something that I'd like to explore more, and I think is an important area that I think's been neglected.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting. I like that slant, and I think I think that would be interesting. I wonder. I don't think I've ever heard of anybody doing any research along those lines, but there's it seems like something that someone should have done already. I mean, there's probably a wealth of resources to study that sort of thing.
But it used to be, but thinkers used to do it. Like Hegel, Karl Marx. Thinkers prior to the Second World War used to work on the basis of, if you're going to have a worldview, a rationality about about your understanding of rationality or whatever, you must have some kind of historiography with that, how it relates to history. So thinkers thought in those terms. So for example, Marx, Hegel, you can go back to Spinoza. But after the Second World War, the issue about meta-narratives, grand historical meta-narratives, went out of fashion, because you had the fascists, and they had a grand meta-narrative about history. And so after the Second World War, Europe wanted to kind of put those kind of big grand meta-narratives about history, trying to bury them because they were becoming divisive. But when you think about Christianity has a grand meta-narrative about history. And when you think about evolution, there is a grand meta-narrative there about history, and that impacts our understanding of how we understand reason, if you take on that kind of thinking. And when you think of Philo, he's doing the same. He's trying to understand history, and he's got a meta-narrative there, and that impacts the way why he's using the word logos in his situation. It's just a thought. I'm not saying I understand fully what I'm talking about, but I'm just saying it's just something that I find, a subject that I find fascinating, and it's an area that I'd like to study more and think about more in the future.
It's interesting. I think there is a little bit to that. I bet that I like that idea of the getting rid of the grand narrative and viewing that as a liability after the Second World War. I mean, I think that might be something that did viscerally quite happen. Just within the generation, they may have just felt like those sort of grand proclamations about what the future ought to look like might have or that what the future was heading towards might have seemed right along those same lines, with fascism and the expansion of the German Empire there.
I think it's an article by, is it Ayala? can't remember. He's a evolutionary philosopher, a philosopher of science, and specializes in evolutionary science. And I think it's Francis Ayala, and he did a paper on it was a paper on in evolutionary in PhD students after the Second World War were told not to use certain types of words that would kind of indicate that there was the word purpose. After the Second World War, he talks about how students were encouraged by their teachers not to use the idea that there is a purpose to things, and to just bury this idea, because it would then encourage people to think that if there's purpose in like biological entities, then that might get them thinking about purposes on a grand scale, and that might lead to meta-narratives in history. And he's the one who talked about this issue about meta-narratives in history, why it was why European thought kind of began to disparage it a bit. So that's the source that I got it from, if I can remember, if I've remembered it correctly.
That's interesting. I mean, have you? Was there any? I'm trying to think. Like, I mean, within those like ideas of like the meta narratives. I mean, I think that a lot of times people will be talking about maybe patterns that they see developing, but I wonder, like, I mean, how much of it is almost predictive in nature, right? I mean, how much of it is sort of seeing it as a development that is bound to happen, almost deterministically, and how much of it is just more of seeing the patterns of human psychology throughout history, right? I think there's sort of there might be a distinction between seeing the narrative and viewing it as a meta narrative, and then using a set meta narrative to try to predict what history is headed towards, or what the purpose of each action within the narrative was meant for. Like,
yeah, those are really good questions, John. Really good questions.
Well, I try to.
It's really good.
But I mean, I think that's where I would see the distinction, right? Yeah, it's definitely, there's a danger there, I think, to seeing it more as predictive rather than almost just descriptive.
Yeah, I think you're bang on about some of the issues there. I think what I think is that the reason why reason, and I use it in a general sense, and history are important is these questions that you're asking, is because, again, going back to Philo talked about the logos, that there is this eternal reason. So he's almost saying that history has a kind of that history is moving to a rational purpose. And the disconnect there is that if reason is within the historical flow, then the historical flow is the historical flow moving in terms of chance? Is it moving in terms of purpose? And these questions that you've asked lead into that and are part of that. And those questions, how you answer them will show whether your position is coherent or not, and whether it's viable. And I think that's the problem. One of the problems that I have with evolution, from a philosophical, historical point of view, is that there's a guy called Monod, who was a Nobel Prize winner in research in evolution and stuff like that. Now I'm fully aware. I'm fully aware when what I'm about to say. I'm fully aware that this has changed. So don't call me out on it, because I'm not. When I give you this quote, I'm fully aware that in modern scholarship concerning evolution, that this quote would not be agreed upon today. But he said that as far as he was concerned, that the beginning of everything biologically, it was by chance. Now I know that in modern times, biologists and philosophers in biology concerning evolution have nuanced that and changed that to saying no, it's not just chance. There is kind of structured. There are structured things going on, and so it's not pure chance. So what I'm trying to say is that I agree with this guy, Monod, and I think that how does that work in terms of if we've got rationality? Because rationality is some kind of ordered structural mechanism of some kind, and if the historical flow is moving in terms of chance, then how does that work? And I understand what you're saying, that if you know, it's very profound what you were saying actually. There are two other aspects that could be, is that everything is predetermined historically, and so reason is seen in that context. But the problem with that is the issue of personality, that we are individuals personally. We are biological entities, but we are personal beings who have relationships, and I think that's a factor that would mitigate talking about everything's already been predetermined historically. The other perhaps way of looking at it is what you've mentioned about maybe that reason and history is kind of a mixture of the two, where you try to reason is just something that we use to kind of predict the future, and I don't know, history is I don't know what I'm talking about there, but those are just a few thoughts anyway. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, you know, there's a lot wrapped up in like the idea that, you know, reason and rationality are very difficult to explain through our experience, you know, and I think that you know, just simply taking, you know, our history or the development of biological life and trying to, you know, force that into our understanding of something so complex that we see like consciousness or our experience, and you know, when I think about how, you know, how multidimensional some of my emotions are and some of the situations we get into are, you know, it's very hard for me to see how that could result from simply biological processes. But you know, I think I'm sure you understand that I'll probably take exception to the use of the word chance there, right? And
Yeah, I knew that.
and that sort of equating it with the idea of arbitrariness, right? I think it's not so unstructured as people might have you believe, right? I think when we talk about chance, there actually is necessarily a structure or a border within which the probabilities exist, right? I think that we don't really have a word for the chance that involves infinite possibilities. We call those like miracles or other things, right? I mean, so I think that when we move beyond the border of possibility, that's when we're not talking about chance anymore. We're talking about something else. And I always use the example of something like, you know, card games and things like that. We consider a poker game a game of chance, but there are set rules and structures within those rules that must exist in order for those odds to exist, right? And I think when we're talking about chances, there's almost an implied structure that we put into something when we're talking about it, and I think that's why I think that's where some of the differences between when people start to talk about chance and evolution, I think there's maybe a little bit of miscommunication. We might be talking over each other as far as the categories that we're talking about here.
I know what you're saying, John, but bringing it back to Philo again. If you I mean you know, but if you look at ancient Greek philosophy, you look at the Stoics, the Epicureans, and then the Jewish philosopher Philo. You look at Genesis chapter 1 and 2, and you look at the history of philosophy. This issue about how we view history and the nature of history, whether it's in the concepts you're talking about, or whether it's chance, or whether it's predetermined. But this is fundamental, because if we get this wrong, everything else gets wrong. So, for example, if you look at all the pre-Socratic philosophers, every single one of them will have some kind of understanding of the beginnings of history. And according to their understanding of the beginning of history, it impacts in their understanding of ethics. This, you know, in Epicureanism and Stoicism, you know, their understanding of history impacts their ethics. So, I think that what you're saying is consistent in your position to a certain point, but is not personally. I don't think it. Even though it's consistent to a point, it's not philosophically rigorous enough. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the way you understand evolution and the way you see things, is consistent. But if you push the boundary and you go beyond that, and you go beyond your conceptions, then you have to really come to the conclusion. This is what I think, and I know you'll disagree, and I've heard you before, and I know like kind of things that you'll say. But I think if you're consistent, there were no variables at the beginning. There were no variables. So that is a kind of chance that you can't talk about structure. When you do start to talk about structure, then surely that implies some kind of order. And if it implies some kind of order, then how do you get that order? That implies itself some kind of rationality. So I don't know if you understand what I'm getting at there. I think that if you were consistent, and I don't know why you're not. I honestly don't understand why you're not. But I feel that if you're being consistent, the beginning of this universe didn't have any variables. That's that is the pushing the boundary. You're stopping at a place that I feel that you're comfortable with. But if you was to push it and to be logically consistent, then your position is there were no variables. For our position is Trinitarian. Our position is the variable was a Trinitarian God. You know, Van Til, I don't, you know, I know you've read Van Til, but Van Til wrote a lovely little essay on the Trinity, and you know, our position is the Trinity, and that's our first variable. Your position is there were no variables, and if there were no variables, that impacts your understanding of ethics. It impacts your understanding of life and everything. And so that's why Philo is talking about the Logos, because he understands that he's got to get some kind of understanding of history, a rationality of history. Otherwise, it's not going to be seen as intellectually viable within ancient Greek and Roman culture. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's some stuff there that I'm obviously disagree with, and I think you know my objections to a lot of the ideas of I think when we go beyond the beginning of the universe, there is I think there is a question about what variables may or may not exist, and that some of those variables may have existed, may not have existed, and I think I don't really profess any particular knowledge of which ones may have been there or not. But I think we're talking from variables that are existing now, right? And so we're sort of trying to almost deconstruct them in a walk backwards when we're talking about variables for causality and things like that. I think it's interesting to posit a Trinitarian God as the almost the axiomatic variable that would sort of lead to the creation of these other variables, but I think it leads to its own problem of causation and what really that means without any variables, right? In a universe without variables, only the God, I mean, could he even know that he was the one who caused the universe? It occurs to me that without this idea of cause and effect, it becomes very difficult for God to even make logical conclusions about his actions and about what his actions could lead to. And so I mean, there's already there's some big questions there that I'm not necessarily sure we answer with the Trinitarian God, but I think that's a very interesting posit, and I did enjoy Van Til's explanation of it. As far as what sort of rationality we could imply from simply our beginnings, I think there's other issues there too, where if we look at rationality as a tool that thinking conscious creatures like us tend to gather, I think that we can look at it as some of us having maybe faculties that are better working or work at a better efficiency than others, and it's why our faculties throughout the animal kingdom seem to get better or worse depending on their needs and their niches, right? And I think evolution does neatly explain why rationality would develop in creatures that are social creatures such as us, and that the need for language and the need to connect with other individuals and to communicate properly would lead us to being something along the lines of a rational and thoughtful creature. And I think that's probably where I would leave that, right? I mean, I think that while I don't think I have any extra proof as to why rationality might exist, I think there's good indication to think that it would be a useful tool for us to have.
Well, I don't know how long we got. I know that you need to go any moment, but I appreciate what you're saying, but I kind of think it's too big for evolution. This issue is too big for evolution to take on. I understand what you're saying about you think about evolution can give us some kind of model to understand the nature of rationality. I think it's too big, sir. I really, really do, and evolution will be crushed under the weight of this issue, and is crushed under this weight because it's too weighty. It's just far too weighty to carry, and I think Christianity can carry that weight far more than evolution can carry the weight. That we have rationality in the historical flow is the central factor in our historical development, and when you get to the Enlightenment, you can see almost you can see, even though there is this refining and defining of reason, you can see that this autonomous situation where they're trying to define reason within the boundaries of nature, they're beginning to be crushed by it, because you see, after Darwin, you see the phenomenal issues that are coming out of that methodology. You see in the 19th century, the wars that were created by that. You see in the beginning of the 20th century, the wars that came out of that. And it was a direct result. I mean, I understand there's many complex political and social issues, but it was a direct result of that human beings were trying to promote themselves as being these rational people who could define their future, and that didn't work out. It didn't work out in the 20th century. The 20th century was the bloodiest century in history, but it all came out of the Enlightenment, John. Yeah, we've had the great achievements. We sent people onto the moon. We had great achievements through that the Enlightenment project. But we also had some pretty most disgusting, crappy things that came out of the Enlightenment. One of the things that we had was a bloody 20th century.
I mean, it's an interesting. I mean, I would debate you on that, but I think, you know, it's probably such a big topic. We would have to, you know, go individually and try to weigh what would be the bigger influence, right? And I think we would probably disagree on what the source of that is. But you know, Jay, I got to get going here. But I want to thank you so much, man, for this opportunity. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm glad to get a chance to talk to you before New Year's here. It's great.
You too, and have a great New Year, mate, and look forward to talking to you in the future, sir.
Absolutely, boss. It's always a pleasure.
Take care. God bless.
Peace and love, Jay.
All right, take care, mate. God bless. Bye now. Okay, folks, I'm gonna close the Google Hangout. If you enjoyed that, I enjoyed talking to John. Thanks, John, for that. Really enjoyed it. So, I would encourage you to go and read Spinoza, Hegel, Marx, Philo. Read John chapter 1, verse 1 and 2, and read God's Undertaker, A Science Very God, and go and read a little bit of Van Til. All right. Thanks for listening, and take care. God bless. Have a happy New Year. And God bless you. I'll probably go and make a few videos on other topics now. Maybe just for, well, I think I'm going to call it a break day. It's 12 o'clock tonight, and I'm going to make myself a nice cup of tea and have a bit of a rest. It's been a good day today. Went to Liverpool, city of Liverpool, and did some evangelism there. And then in the end of the day, about 5 o'clock, I preached for about 45 minutes, got a terrible cold, which is cleared up quite a bit now. Preached for about 45 minutes, and had a few conversations with people, and came back. I had a McDonald's as well. I enjoyed that. Chocolate milkshake and fries and a double Mac. I really enjoyed it. It was good. And I came back. To my sins, I had a bacon and egg sandwich as well. But I do have an excuse. I had to walk about 25 minutes, 30 minutes into Liverpool from the car, a friend of mine car, and I had to work about 30 minutes back to the car. So I'd walked my McDonald's off. But I've got a bad cold. It's clearing up. But it's been a good year. And I'm looking forward to the new year. And thanks, John, for coming on. I'm going to go now. God bless you and take care. And I hope that we can do some more Google Hangouts in the future with folk. Take care and have a great new year. All right. God bless you, everybody. Take care.